So a few months ago, we started studying this text from the Vedas known as Ishavasya Upanishad, which is the 40th chapter from the second Veda. Vedas are the most ancient collection of teachings of the ancient masters in India. And yoga, even if it is not in great detail explained in the Vedas, each and every idea that has been developed by later yogic masters, starting with Patanjali, when the yoga tradition can be identified into a very distinct discipline of practice and of study. But the seeds of all those ideas are already present in the Vedic texts, which were composed not only just a few hundred years before Patanjali, but approximately at least more than 1,000 years before Patanjali. So this 40th chapter, which is the last concluding chapter of the Yajurveda, the second Veda, is completely dedicated. It talks about consciousness, it talks about the self, what is known in the yogic traditions, in the Vedic traditions, as Atman, the self. We had already studied some verses before this long holiday of 3-4 months came in between. We had studied up to the 6th mantra, 6th verse. So we will continue from the 7th onwards, because this is a class in continuation. But before we do that, we will just once recite all the mantras that are there, including the prayer that is there. So just pronounce it together. The transliteration which is there will help you if you want to join in the pronunciation as well. We'll get a few more copies for the next class. This time you might have to share with each other. नमो ब्रह्मादिभ्यो ब्रह्मविद्या संप्रदायकर्तृभ्यो वंशऋषिभ्यो महद्भ्यो नमो गुरुभ्यः सर्वोपप्लवरहितः प्रज्ञानघनः प्रत्यगर्थो ब्रह्मैवाहमस्मि ब्रह्मैवाहमस्मि। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। ॐ ईशावास्यमिदं सर्वं यत्किञ्च जगत्यां जगत् तेन त्यक्तेन भुञ्जीथ मा गृधः कस्य स्विद्धनं कुर्वन्नेवेह कर्माणि जिजीविषेच्छतं समाः। एवं त्वयिनान्यथेतोऽस्ति न कर्म लिप्यते नरे। असुर्या नाम ते लोका अन्धेन तमसा वृताः तांस्ते प्रेत्याभिगच्छन्ति ये केचात्महनो जनाः। अनेजदेकं मनसो जवीयो नैनद्देवा आप्नुवन् पूर्वमर्षत् तद्धावतोऽन्यानत्येति तिष्ठत् तस्मिन्नपो मातरिश्वा दधाति तदेजति तन्नैजति तद्दूरे तदवन्तिके तदन्तरस्य सर्वस्य तदु सर्वस्यास्य बाह्यतः यस्तु सर्वाणि भूतानि आत्मन्येवानुपश्यति सर्वभूतेषु चात्मानं ततो न विजुगुप्सते। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। When we practice asana, the purpose of asana is to pull back our awareness, our consciousness, which otherwise roams around in the whole world. Even if we just sit down, we keep on thinking about other things. But this is a very important point because we use the word yoga very freely. But asana is not equal to yoga, nor is pranayama equal to yoga, nor is simply meditation equal to yoga. All of these are included in the idea of yoga, and just doing an asana does not make it yoga, or just practicing pranayama does not make it yoga. There is a very beautiful discussion on the sutras of pranayama in Sage Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, where he discusses tato dvandvan abhighatah tasmin sati shwasa prashwasayor gati vichhedah pranayamah. On the sutra of pranayama, in which he defines pranayama, he says that after a person has mastered asana, and then when he starts practicing control over breathing in and breathing out, either through practicing controlled breathing or ultimately through retention, that is called pranayama. A very simple definition of pranayama. A few more sutras are there which further define it, which further define the subtle states. Yet the commentator there, one of the ancient commentators, he says that one thing which Patanjali has not mentioned but which has to be understood for pranayama to become yoga, one has to attach one's awareness to the flow of breath. Only then it becomes yoga. Otherwise it will just be pranayama and it will remain pranayama. It will not become yoga. And this is why I said that pranayama, simply doing pranayama is not equal to practicing yoga if we are just breathing but there is no awareness attached to our breath. And the same can be applied to our practice of asana. When if we are just completely occupied with our posture, or if that really happens, then we have drawn back our awareness, then we have drawn back our consciousness. Otherwise, just standing in a posture and allowing the mind to go here and there, first of all, a correct posture will not be possible. One can see it very clearly in the posture itself that the mind is not here. Because the posture can only become perfect when the body is mastered, when the body is controlled by that awareness. So awareness is an essential component. Otherwise, asana is just a posture. But along with awareness, when that component comes together with asana, then asana becomes yoga. So this is something that has to be remembered. So when we practice asana with an understanding of yoga, we do it to train our awareness. And the same thing these ancient masters used to do with these mantras. And that is why the very meaning of the word mantra, each one of them is called a mantra. Man means to meditate, and tra means to protect. Manana trayate iti mantraha. If a person meditates on this, the mind is saved from going into unnecessary thoughts, from going into harmful thoughts. And this is why for centuries these mantras were never written down. They were never written down on paper. It was even by the latest date of ascribed to the composing of these texts around for 2000 years. These mantras were never written down. They were always preserved in memory. Even though, for example, Ramayana and Mahabharata, these great epics, were already written down, mostly people believe approximately around 300-400 BC. And these texts were composed far before that, and yet the first time they were written down was as late as approximately the 10th century, 11th century AD, when they came under threat, and the only way to preserve them would have been to commit them to writing. So under the Vijayanagar Empire, for example, this great empire which was built in South India, which was inspired by one of the greatest masters of Vedanta, Vidyaranya Muni, when the first prime minister of that empire collected the different Vedic mnemonic traditions all over India and brought them all together. That it seems that when for the first time these texts were clearly written down. So the purpose of these mantras, why we think about them, why we contemplate on them, why we meditate on them, is because they don't talk about something out there, but they talk about something in here, which makes us aware of something within ourselves, and hence, taking them as a tools, we again become capable of drawing back our awareness into ourselves and thus creating a balance in one's life, not always completely remaining lost in the external world, but finding this balance of exploring the internal world, which when we start exploring it, we start taking care of it, we start creating order in it, and that's when it starts becoming beautiful and really enjoyable within. That is the whole purpose, that is the whole idea behind contemplation and behind meditation. And if the Upanishads, because the very meaning of the word Upanishad, when I talked about the meanings of the word Upanishad, I clarified that Upanishad means to come close to oneself and sit down close to oneself. And what does that mean? If we analyze our own self, the way the Upanishads allow us to analyze ourselves, this fundamental idea of the Upanishads, which is widely applied also in the philosophical teachings of yoga. Guruji speaks of it so often, the 5 koshas, the 5 layers, and then the innermost consciousness. So we allow the perishable aspect of ourself to come close and to sit close to the imperishable aspect of oneself. This is the meaning of the very word Upanishad. Upa means close, Nishat means to sit down. So the last mantra that we studied was one of the most beautiful mantras of this Upanishad, because it talks about transcending hatred, transcending aversion. In other words, developing universal love towards all as the result of understanding the inner core essence. So I will slightly touch again on this mantra before we continue into the next one. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanyeva anupashyati. Someone who sees all beings in that essential nature, in the self, in that Atman, and sees oneself in all, which means an awareness of unity, an awareness of interconnectedness has dawned upon such a person, then tato na vijugupsate. Then such a person, due to this awareness, by virtue of that, tataha, by virtue of that, vision of oneness, vision of unity, that is again what the word yoga means. Yoga means 2 things. Yoga means union, or yoga also means a means, a technique, a method to acquire that union. So when we call asana yoga, then we call it yoga because it is a means, it is a method to acquire that awareness. If we call meditation yoga, it is because it is a method, it is a means. But yoga ultimately means union. So in that union, by virtue of that union, by virtue of that yoga, again the word yoga is clearly being used in the sense in which the yogic traditions used it already in the Upanishads. Similarly, like Patanjali comes up with a small definition in the second sutra, Yogaschitta Vritti Nirodhaha, the definition of the Upanishads is still longer, and they give a very clear definition of the word yoga, which makes it very clear that already a tradition of yogic practitioners was in place. And in fact, traditionally, all these Vedic teachings are results of yogic practices. So yogic practices basically come first, and the experiences that have been expressed verbally by the masters in the Vedic teachings come afterwards. Because whatever they have expressed in words are thoughts and ideas and experiences that they had within themselves when they entered within themselves, and entering one's own self, that is what is known as the yoga patha, the path of yoga. The path of non-yoga goes from in to out. When our awareness flows from in to out, it is the common path. And the path that they speak of flows into the opposite direction. When Patanjali speaks about this in the Yoga Sutras, he says that this flow of consciousness can flow in both directions. This river of consciousness can flow in both directions. Either it can flow from out to in, or it can also be made to flow from in to out, from out to in. Centrifugal tendencies and centripetal tendencies when we draw back our awareness to one's own self. This Upanishad, which we are studying right now, this Ishavasya Upanishad, is the first and the most ancient amongst all the Upanishads. However, and it is also very short, the second shortest Upanishad. The shortest Upanishad is Mandukya Upanishad, which is also one of the deepest and the most sublime. It's all about Om and how to use Om as a meditative technique to draw back one's awareness, and what does Om really mean. So that is solely discussed in Mandukya Upanishad. That is the smallest Upanishad, just 12 verses, and this is the second shortest one with 18 verses. Then there is the longest Upanishad, extremely huge, with 6 chapters and really, really big. That is known as Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Brihadaranyaka means Brihat, the name itself suggests big, the big Upanishad. And Aranyaka means an Upanishad which ought to be studied in the forests, and the big one. So the name itself suggests that it is really big. There is deep analysis of dream, of the experience that we have in deep sleep, but not in the sense that analyzing dream content. No. That if you see this dream, then that will be the consequence. No, nothing like that. What we mean is the whole experience itself, and what is the message that one can derive? Because the experience is real. The experiencer who is having the experience, that is real. So a lot of discussion is there. Patanjali just points towards it in his Yoga Sutras when he says that inner purification can be acquired by swapna nidra dhyana lambanam, by meditating upon the experiences a person has had in the dreaming state of awareness and in deep sleep. So he refers to that, but he doesn't show how it is done. I think Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is the most ancient text that literally gets into it in great detail. However, that Upanishad is directly related to this Upanishad because it is like an ancient detailed commentary of this Upanishad. And therefore I keep on mentioning it. Even in my previous classes I mentioned it a few times because it's an ancient commentary. So there, and of course here you don't see any stories, but the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is also filled with various stories which are related to the teachings which are given here. So this last mantra that we studied, in which there is this idea of transcending aversion, related to this, there is a small story there that, and one should always just, when it comes to the stories of the Upanishads, the masters tell us again and again that don't get too much into the content, try to derive the message out of it, because these stories are just to make it a little bit lighter and palatable and more graspable for us. That is the whole purpose. So what happens is that the gods, the angelic beings, the human beings, and the demons, all these three groups, and practically humanity is divided into these three types of people anyway. So these three groups hear that their father Brahma has acquired some deep wisdom, some deep knowledge about something, but what is it? They don't know. So they decide that we should go to our, because in Vedic mythology, all these three beings are the creation of the same entity. And it makes sense because ultimately Prajapati stands for the individual human being, and these are the three types of emotions, three types of tendencies that can be produced, either selfless tendencies or completely selfish tendencies, or the tendencies that are in between. We discussed this in great detail when we were studying the word Asurya Namate Lokaha, when we were studying the third mantra, Asura, the meaning of the Asura. So I will not get into that. So these three groups send their representatives to Brahma to acquire that wisdom. Brahma made them to work with themselves. He made them to meditate for quite a long time without giving them any teaching at all, which gave them moments of self-analysis, and they could realize what was lacking in them. So after these years, according to the story, these years of self-analysis passed, when the angelic beings, the devas, the radiant beings, came to Brahma, he just taught them one letter, Da, nothing more, just one letter, and said, think about this, this is enough for you, you don't need to know more than this. They went back and the others asked, what did he teach? They said, he just taught the. That's all. And he said, think about it, analyze it. What does it mean? Then the humans went, they also went to Brahma, and Brahma again said the same letter, the. That's it. The teaching is over. Go back. Now just digest it. You don't need anything more. Everything is in this. They also went back. And then the demons came. And the same thing happened to them also. The same letter was taught to them also. Then they decided we have to meditate. We have to find out what this teaching really means. When he has taught it, he's our Father, he would not misguide us and he wouldn't cheat us. So when he told this to us, we have to have faith in this and we have to think about it, what he really wanted to tell us. So all the three groups sat down for meditation, and ultimately what they realized, the angelic beings realized that even though we live in heaven, we enjoy the heavenly pleasures, and in that enjoyment we lack self-control, and therefore when he said the, he actually meant, it's playing on Sanskrit words, the means damyata. The stands for damyata, and damyata in Sanskrit means control yourself, be the master of yourself. So this is what he taught to the angelic beings, that this is what you need, because living in the heaven, you enjoy yourselves and you have no control over yourselves. So this is what you need to do, damyata. And this is basically what yoga is about, because asana practice, through asana practice we gain control over our annamaya kosha, the physical body. With pranayama we gain control over our breathing pattern, which is then again like the body, and the breathing pattern is deeply connected to the mind. Then we become more we go deeper, and then again through pratyahara, control over senses, and through dharana, dhyana and samadhi, the rest of the limbs, control over one's mind. So control of what over what? Because usually the word that is used is atma sanyama, control over oneself. But what does it mean? Control of what over what? Control of the imperishable aspect, which is consciousness, over the perishable aspect, which is mind, breath, body and senses, which are our perishable aspect. So the control of consciousness, which is the imperishable aspect, which is the universally connected aspect, to allow that to control the perishable, the individually identified aspect, to allow that which is interconnected with everyone, which is one and the same in all, to allow that to control that which is individual, which is divided. My body is different from your body. My breath is different from your breath. My mind, my thought pattern, my chitta is completely different from your chitta. My senses are completely different from your senses. But when it comes to the level of consciousness, pure consciousness that the Upanishads speak about, that is one, that is the same. And if that doesn't make sense to us, then it simply means that we need to think about consciousness more. We have to analyze it more. We have to question it more. We have to meditate on that more directly, and benefiting from the teachings that the masters have given on consciousness. So this was the meaning that the angelic beings, the devas, the radiant beings, they derived from the letter the. Then comes then what about the human beings? The human beings realized that for us it is very difficult to share with others. We always want to possess, we always want to grasp. Even as a small child, we want to get hold of everything, we want to possess, we want to grasp. It is very difficult for us to give. We want to hold. So, for them, when they realized this discrepancy within themselves by self-analysis, they realized that the letter da for them meant datta. Datta simply means it's a commandment. Like damyata is a commandment, control yourself. Similarly, datta is a commandment, give. That's all. Charity. That's all. So that is what the humans derived, and the demons, which, as we explained, because the word in Sanskrit is asura. Asu means senses, and ra means someone who is completely lost in the gratification of one's senses, and therefore does not care about other people. Completely selfish. That is basically what the word asura stands for. And what such a person lacks most is compassion. Because the moment we become selfish, selfishness and compassion, these two things cannot be together. A compassionate person cannot be selfish, and someone who is selfish cannot be compassionate. So they realized that something that they lack is compassion. So they understood by the dayadhvam, which is again a commandment, be compassionate. So damyata, gain control over oneself, datta, give, and dayadhvam, be compassionate. This is what is the story that is given in relation to this 6th verse there in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And I think today, for example, just recently I was reading about the Stanford Center for Studies and Research on Compassion and Altruism. As part of medical science, and this is not a philosophical school. This center belongs to the medical school of Stanford University. The fact that compassion has such a deep effect, even simply on our physical health, then what to say about our mental health? And this teaching of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which has been discussed in relationship to this teaching of transcending hatred, there would be the most ancient teaching, at least on the Indian subcontinent, in which it has been clearly expressed that be compassionate, practice compassion in one's life. So this is one of the purpose of developing a vision, developing an understanding of one's own self. And the moment we use the word self, especially with S capital, we mean consciousness, always. We always mean consciousness. So by being with that consciousness, the first thing that happens is that a person transcends, becomes capable of transcending aversion, transcending hatred. And now the next mantra talks about transcending moha, transcending ignorance, transcending infatuation. Because ultimately, where is aversion, where is hatred rooted? What is the root? What is the root of hatred? According to the understanding of all the yogic traditions, hatred is part of this fivefold ignorance, in which fundamental ignorance is seen as the root cause, and the rest of the four are seen as its effects, after effects. And these five together are seen as the fundamental causes of suffering. That is why they are called the kleshas. Patanjali calls them the kleshas, the five fundamental causes of suffering. The first one is avidya, ignorance, and as a result of this ignorance, a misunderstanding of one's own self occurs, and that leads to egoism, which is known as ahankara, a false concept of oneself, what then can also lead to narcissism, which is where it leads. That is basic. I'll come back to this idea in relation to this mantra possibly in my next talk. So ego. Then the third one is the moment we have developed a misunderstanding of the self, a confused understanding of the self, then selfish attachment arises as a result of that, and as a result of selfish attachment, aversion, hatred arises, and where there is hatred, there is fear. So ignorance, false understanding of oneself, misconception of one's own self, misunderstanding of one's own self, selfish attachment, selfishness, hatred, and fear. These are the five fundamental causes of suffering in Patanjali's idea. So even if aversion has been overcome through practicing charity, through practicing altruism, for the social purpose we have become a wonderful human being, a very noble human being, yet deep down within us still the seeds, the roots are present, and those roots still have to be removed, and those roots are what is called moha, which has been used in the next verse. Should we pronounce it? Yasmin sarvani bhutani atmaiva abhut vijanatah tatra ko mohaha kaha shokaha ekatvam anupashyatah yasmin sarvani bhutanyatmaiva bhudvijanatah tatra ko mohaha kah shoka ekatvam anupashyatah. Basically, both mantras are saying the same thing, yet there is a deep fundamental differences which I doubt any English commentator has ever noticed, because that is something that lies in the Sanskrit words, and that is a very fundamental difference. This is what I'm going to point out today. Even though both mantras speak about seeing oneself in others and others in oneself, you can see even in the translation, he who sees all beings in the self only and the self in all beings, he does not feel any aversion by virtue of that. Then when to the person of realization all beings have become his very self, then what delusion and what grief can there be for such a seer of oneness? So basically both are talking about something the same. But even if you look at the structure of the first half of both verses, it's exactly nearly the same. When I try to recite the mantras from memory, I usually sometimes mix them up because the words are the same, you know. But there is a deep fundamental difference between both, and that lies in anupashyati and vijanataha, in these two words, in the verb that has been used. Anupashyati means to see something after. This anu is very important. It is also there in Atha Yoga Anushasanam. There the word anu is there, and the same meaning in which it has been used there, it has also been used here. Anu means following. Following what? Following the teachings of the masters. Following the teachings of the scriptures. So after a person sees it, following the teachings of the scriptures and the masters, that is what the previous mantra speaks about. Yet the verb that has been used here gives no scope to that. Is a step further. It uses the word vijnana, which is the Sanskrit word for science, which means direct observance. So by now I'm sure that you must have guessed the fundamental difference, that in the experience is the same in both verses, but in one case it was dependent and it was just a faith because the masters say it, because the scriptures say it. That is how it starts for the first time in the beginning. Yes, the great masters have said that everything is in oneself and everything is, I am in all, therefore I should not hate anybody. So this faith in the teachings of the masters, of the living masters and of the ancient masters who have left the planet, by faith can lead us to that level. But beyond that, the complete eradication, yes, selfishness will be eradicated, but what about acquiring a clear concept of oneself and thus destroying ignorance altogether? That does not happen unless a person has experienced it directly for himself and is completely independent from these teachings or anybody's teachings. Then it becomes vijanata, because that is the difference. You know, in Sanskrit, sometimes even in the Bhagavad Gita, you use two words, jnana vijnana sahitam. Jnana and vijnana. Jnana means knowledge. Vijnana also means knowledge. So often people ask, what is the difference between these two words? There then the masters explain, jnana is second-hand knowledge and vijnana is direct experience. That is the difference. The moment we add the prefix vi to jnana, to the root jna, of which this is the form janataha, to know. In fact, the English word know, actually, it is derived from the same Proto-Indo-European root, gnosis, gno, gna, jna, jya, from which the Sanskrit word jya has been derived. Sorry? Yeah, gnosis. Yeah, the Gnostic traditions, they were, yes. So, this is the difference. One is second-hand knowledge. And the masters often make, even in the state of meditation, there are specific words. Upasana. Upasana is also meditation. And dhyana is also meditation. Nididhyasana is also meditation. But if you meditate on something out of faith, simply because you have read that I'm all this, or I'm one with the universe, simply because you have read it and you have developed a faith in it, and if you meditate on that as a result of that, it is merely upasana. But when such a meditation occurs after, not because you have heard it from someone, because one actually feels that way, the heart, hridayena bhyanujyatah, the heart, our conscience, our logical instrument, all this completely allows us to accept it. Then hridayena bhyanujyatah, then it becomes nididhyasana, then it becomes dhyana. So these subtle differences lie sometimes in the way the masters have presented, but sometimes it becomes very difficult to express them into an English translation, but they have to be explained. So we will come back to this mantra again, and we will see what the rest of the words mean and how it is related also, because this idea of ekatva, this idea of oneness, and how it is one of the fundamental ideas in yoga philosophy, ekatattva abhyasa, every practice should develop that one-pointedness, that oneness. So even if we are practicing asana, our mind has to rest on one, the most pertinent part of our body. So that focus of oneness, that idea of ekatva, which has been mentioned here, and how how these ideas have been applied in the West. For example, I'm amazed, particularly when I study, whenever I have a time, I explore a little bit the field of psychology, and I see, for example, how this idea of training one's mind to focus on one thought has actually helped in suicidal thoughts, and therefore has become one of the standard practices that are taught to counteract suicidal thoughts. So there are so many modern applications to these ideas, to these thoughts. We'll study about that in our next session. If any thoughts or any further clarification is required, please let me know. We still have a few moments. This time today I took 55 minutes, but usually the idea is that I just speak for 45 minutes and then 15 minutes we have an interactive question-answer session. But today was the first class, so I thought you might not have many questions. Maybe I was wrong. Yes.
Actually, I have a few things to say. First, do you mind if I tell the class about the David Vedanta page on Facebook? Is that okay?
No, perfectly all right, yes.
I wanted to say something about Siddhartha-ji and his friend Ishavasya, who's from the Omkarananda ashram in Switzerland. They just very recently, about 2 months ago, opened up this beautiful Facebook page. It's called David Vedanta, where every day they're posting just a beautiful verse of Vedanta, translated into English, and of course in Sanskrit, English, and then the transliteration. If you get a chance, you should really look at it, because many of these verses are not well known, and they're absolutely beautiful. And I believe a German version is coming soon.
Yeah.
German version.
German version.
Hopefully Italian. We're trying to find other language scholars, Sanskrit scholars, in different countries, like Vedanta Brigade going on. So that this Daily Vedanta comes out in many other languages, but for the moment it's in English. You should really look at it, it's beautiful.
Yeah, unfortunately most of Shankaracharya's work on Vedanta remains either not translated into English, or the translations that are there are age-old translations, make use of very old language, and it sometimes becomes very difficult to relate with it. So what Vidyabhaskar does very well is to come up with a wonderful modern English translation of these, and this is something that he wants to do. He wants to translate all the 10 books of Shankaracharya. It is a huge body of literature. He wants to translate that into modern English. And of course, I'm sure he can do it. He's just 30 years old. Enthusiastic.
It's very poetic the way that
Yeah.
it's also a good.
The beauty of Shankaracharya was that he was a great philosopher. At the same time, he was also a very great poet. So many of his compositions, apart from his philosophical work, his introductory work can sometimes be very poetic. And that makes it very beautiful, such as Yoga Vasishtha is also that kind of a text. So there are many beautiful texts. I mean, so many beautiful texts in Sanskrit. These different schools of arts, poetry, sculpture, painting, these were very much alive in ancient India. And these philosophers were also great artists. They were great painters, they were great musicians, they were great dancers. So they connected everything. Everything for them was deeply interconnected, and art was more like what they were talking about here. That was an expression of that. So they saw it as the expression of the internal beauty into the external world. So there was a deep interconnectedness with art. Yes, so some of these quotations are very deeply inspiring, which they are good. That is the ultimate purpose. Yes, that is the ultimate. Just to keep, to inspire us to think about something more than simply about our daily worries about food and money and this and that. Just to raise our awareness a little bit higher than that. So that is basically the purpose. Yes. So that is what you wanted to share.
And of course the previous talks on
Yes.
Upanishads, they are also available on Facebook and our Facebook.
On YouTube, yes. Yes. I have tried to, because mostly students keep on changing. So I try to pack. I try on the basis of one mantra. I try to pack as much information as I can into each and every session, so that they can go back with as much information as can be given in 1 hour. This is at least what I try. So each one of these talks is a result of a lot of work, a lot of self-analysis, a lot of internal thinking, spending a lot of time. So if you are interested, then, and of course, why we covered only 6 mantras in 5 months. In 5 months was because there was a lot of introduction there which we discussed. General introduction to the Upanishads. Those Upanishads still remain relatively unknown. The Gita is mostly the most widely known and widely read text. But Gita is just presents the quintessence of the Upanishads with a very pronounced theistic approach additionally, which is there in some of the Upanishads but can also be relatively lacking in others. So in some they speak of God, but then it is not more than an object to concentrate the mind upon, such as it is in the Yoga Sutras. But ultimately, even that idea, the concept of God, becomes a means, a technique, a tool to go beyond that. That is again a fundamental idea of Vedanta, which has been expressed that by meditating on the ultimate cause, to reach that in which there is no cause and no effect. If God is the cause, then even that becomes meaningless in that. So that would be the Godhead of Meister Eckhart, for example. So, for example, Kenopanishad, the second Upanishad, is very strict. It says, Yan manasana manute, that which cannot be thought about by the mind, yena hur manomatam, but by which even the mind, the thoughts are thought. Tadeva brahmatvam vidhi, know that to be pure consciousness. Nedam yadidam upasate, not this which you worship, referring as this. So that approach also we find in the Upanishads, because ultimately the Upanishads, that is why in the beginning I said very clearly that the Upanishads are not about anything else. They are about ourselves, about the core of our being. They are talking about me, they are talking about you, they are talking about each one of us, they are talking about everybody. So, yes, let us conclude today's class with the prayer that is there on the last page. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। Thank you very much.